What's up guys, Houndish here, and today another rant from me. Safe to say with the mood of the community at large at the moment, videos complaining about Destiny 2 seem to perform pretty well. And yeah, there's that component where negativity, of course, does well on the internet, but it also reflects the mood of a lot of players at the moment. And frustratingly in a way, this week, Bungie dropped quite a few updates for the portal. One of the big parts was the power changes that they've introduced, increasing the amount of power that we earn at base. Once again, they've done this a handful of times over the past couple of months. Then there's the part where they added bonus engrams as being powerful drops, so playing activities with the most rewards actually listed in them is the most effective way to power level. And they also adjusted power deltas, which generally, I think most players seem to be enjoying at the moment, and ultimately, this means right now, if you're looking to power level in Destiny, which I know there's a big problem where power leveling is one of the only real bits of progression, or the only really impactful feeling progression in the game at the moment, because it affects the kind of rewards that we can earn. And leveling up is finally at a place where it feels pretty good. It feels quick enough that a lot more players would probably want to engage with this system. So why am I complaining? Well, I think ultimately the frustrating part is how long it has taken Bungie to get to this point. We all know that developing the game takes a long time. Making impactful changes and bigger changes, like the portal for instance, Bungie doing something significant with that is going to take many more months at best. But the frustrating part is that, in terms of the power leveling, Bungie actually dragged their feet for quite a long time, making very incremental changes, and I can appreciate, to an extent, because this is a very important system in the game, Bungie didn't want to go ahead and just nerf it immediately and let players level up too fast, only to find that players will not play the game for a few months before the next drop. Ultimately, it feels like we kind of end up in that position regardless. And because Bungie weren't making big enough changes quick enough, it's led to a massive amount of frustration for players and a lot of folks saying, well, they're done with Destiny, right? When we see the player numbers now, the game has suffered fairly significantly because of the new systems, and part of that is that players don't like the portal. The other component, or at least the other significant component, was the power leveling and the grind involved. And so because Bungie seemed to take a really long time to make these bigger swings at power leveling changes, they've allowed more and more players to drop off, and it's got to the point where Bungie are looking at the landscape in front of them and have now decided that we will not get a power increase in Renegades, we will not get a power reset in Renegades. We should also recognize that they're ditching the unstable core economy, which basically nobody likes. So you have to give credit where it's due on that front. But one of the big things that I think Bungie should learn from this is that after 10 years, the community is in a place where they get tired very quickly. And when we have these kind of small iterative updates and it feels like Bungie are not responding to feedback quick enough, which was absolutely the case for the power leveling systems, I'm sure there is a degree of complexity in actually changing that, but it's nowhere near as difficult as completely revamping the portal, for instance. And given the fact that Bungie have now made really big changes to power leveling moving forward, the learning should absolutely be that with community sentiment where it is, there are a bunch of battles between Bungie and the community that they ultimately just cannot win, and this was one of them. I also believe that they could have made bigger changes more quickly with regards to power leveling specifically. We also saw a month or so ago the emergency update that they dropped, where they actually applied a lot of changes to power leveling server-side essentially without requiring a big patch, which I think indicates that Bungie have had more levers at their disposal to make changes on the fly than they've wanted the community to really know about. But ultimately, dragging their feet has just fatigued more and more people and brought player numbers to a franchise low as far as we understand it. So yeah, I'm kind of ranting here, but the thing that Bungie should learn from this is that in those instances where you're in a battle that you're not probably going to win with the community, they should probably drag their feet a little bit less. And we are probably talking about leadership level decisions here, of course. It was clear that Bungie wanted player retention to increase, especially in a world where they ultimately have fewer players than what we had a year or 2 years ago. So it's obvious that this was important, right? The amount of grind was very much intentional. It's the same with unstable cores. It wasn't just, oh, we may have kind of overtuned the requirement here a little bit. No, you absolutely wanted this to be a ludicrous grind, which I respect the fact that you kind of experimented with that, but when it was clear that players didn't like it, there should have been changes happening much faster. And the fact that that didn't happen, we now have the evidence that tells us this is hurting the franchise, right? So that's why I'm frustrated, despite the fact that we now have some really good changes actually live in the game. And if you are someone who plans to come back for Renegades, if you're not playing the game very much right now, I think with the new changes to power, it's worth giving it another shot in that regard, right? We also have a couple of events coming up, Festival, and the Call to Arms stuff at the end of the season that looks like it's going to be really rewarding. And ultimately, anything we do in the game now will prepare us for Renegades because Bungie will not be resetting power. I'm not sure how that's going to impact rewards when we get into the next expansion, earning high tier loot. But if the amount of grind was a big problem, it's safe to say that it's definitely gotten a lot better. On the flip side of all of that, if you really hate the portal, obviously that has not yet changed, outside of, activity difficulty and things. I also anticipate that we're going to see incremental improvements in Renegades, but obviously Bungie are not going to be able to do something much more significant where they totally rework the portal back into, the world map or something like that. I just don't see that happening. It sounds like it's going to take a fair bit more time. Maybe during one of the expansions next year, we'll see a change more like that. So I'll appreciate that there will be folks who do not want to come back to that. And if you don't want to come back to it now, you probably still won't want to come back to it in Renegades or during the Renegades era. Separately, of course, the new content in Renegades will exist within its own bubble, in a way. So if you've already bought it and you want to experience the campaign and the post-game for that, to an extent, you could kind of ignore the portal and just focus on the Renegade stuff, especially if you're at the kind of power levels where you're going to be able to get the higher tier loot, which really is what all of the chase is about right now. But that's kind of a side note anyway. The point I'm making is that ultimately, because of the way Bungie have handled things, there's a degree of the community, and not, of course, everybody, but lots of players kind of punishing Bungie with their lack of movement with regards to the amount of grind that was in the game up until this point in time. Of course, grind can be a good thing. I think one of the reasons that players didn't like it this time around is that the game feels relatively shallow versus where it's been in the past. And that's the number one thing that Bungie should learn from in this instance. And I'm only saying it because I feel like there were levers there that Bungie just didn't pull because they had a different vision to what players in the community were asking for. And again, there's a distinction between things that you can change quickly and things that you can't, which is why I've referenced the flaws with the portal so much, because that is a longer term change. So I guess I'll finish with a question. For those of you guys who've continued playing up until this point in time, how are you finding the new power changes in the portal? I certainly think most players find it more palatable. On the other end of that, if you dropped out around when Edge of Fate came out, or, shortly after it, has the catch-up that Bungie dropped with that chest loot and the subsequent changes to power leveling and progression actually moved the needle in terms of your interest in Destiny? I'll be really curious to get those thoughts in the comment section from you all. I do think, where possible, Bungie are going to react to feedback differently in the next few months. And we're seeing evidence of that with the changes they've outlined for Renegades, the economy that they're ditching, really big components of Bungie's plan for the game moving forward. They've ultimately recognized that it's not going to work. So in future, the people making those kind of higher level decisions need to be more cognizant of what is the trend, what is the direction that we're starting to go in terms of sentiment, and where will that ultimately end up if we don't react appropriately. I think because Edge of Fate actually retained players early on, for a good few weeks after its launch, because of the amount of grind, there may have been a part where Bungie were looking at playtime overall, and it looked relatively positive. But aside from that, there were a lot of people ready to quit the game, and ultimately that is what happened. So Bungie need to be a bit more predictive, perhaps. And again, I think we're in a different place now to where we were 2 or 3 years ago. People have always complained about various things in Destiny, but patience is a lot thinner right now than it was. So it's something to think about and be aware of with changes in the future. That's it for now. Just a bit of a rant today. I hope you guys found it somewhat interesting. Share your thoughts below. I appreciate you watching as always, but otherwise, I hope you guys have an awesome day.